For Julia and Ukraine. For Julia and Ukraine is an album of 14 songs sung in both English and Ukrainian, celebrating the stoicism and heroism of the Ukrainian people and questioning the causes and motivations behind Putin's war. Thank you for listening to, downloading, streaming or buying this collection of songs, and in so doing, you're helping support the Ukrainian relief effort. I hope these songs move you and help fuel a better world. As I say in the song Brothers, it only takes a storm to change the weather. Did anyone really believe that Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, president of Russia, would invade Ukraine? I didn't, though I felt that China, America and the British knew. Around the dinner table, my friends said all independent countries, including Ukraine, can ally as they wish. For example, join the EU, a commercial, not a military organisation. However, if I lived next door to a bear, I wouldn't stick my head in its mouth. So I was a lone voice saying that Ukraine should remain neutral. Neutrality is a bargaining chip. It offers both sides something. This collection of songs is to support all Ukrainians, and in particular, Julia Vasina, who illustrates my Spid the Spider children's books. She is Ukrainian. Julia had to move out of her city apartment to live in the countryside when the bombing started. But the bombs kept coming, so she then fled to Poland with her young son. This was an arduous journey, and at times dangerous journey. I started writing as an expression of support and soon found I had an album's worth of songs. The album is titled For Julia and Ukraine, as countries comprise individuals, and I want the songs to resonate with individuals not only in Ukraine, but around the world. Writing these lyrics also helped me learn more about the causes, the morality and principles behind the war, and I hope they help you better understand too. Pete Diamond from Diamond Studios composed and produced the music for all of the songs in this collection, except for I Apologise. And in so doing, he gave them extra meaning. The songs are as follows. Here is track 1, Julia's Story. It was difficult to stay true to Julia's words, so I used no choruses to avoid diluting their impact. Tally Cord sings in both English and Ukrainian. I hear lots of grace and feeling, a mixture of Mary Hopkins and Joan Baez in Tally's tone and phrasing. Here is track 2, Today the Whole World is Ukrainian. This song is about the beginning of the war and inspired by the expressions of support and solidarity received from my Facebook Somerset for Ukraine group. Leandro Bastos sings the stirring English version, and Volodymyr Zhuzhevich sends shivers down his spine with the Ukrainian version. He did this for free. I didn't ask for Volodymyr to do this for free, he wanted to. Here is track 3, Lack of Love. This song questions Putin's upbringing. How an only surviving child of the 1950s and now a 70-year-old man could start the war. He's a father, grandfather, leader and a supposed role model. Reflecting on a small, sickly, only surviving child raised in poverty posed 2 questions. Firstly, has he an inferiority complex? George Macaulay Trevelyan, a British historian and academic, has a famous quote, "A little man often casts a long shadow." A smaller individual has to raise himself in other ways to show he is at least an equal or in his mind superior. Or secondarily, is he a dreamer, whose aspirations are simply to take his country back to the age of Catherine the Great? An era of Russian might and power as long as you conveniently forget the murders, mass starvation and deprivation of the Russian people. Anna Kipyatkova asked the question with clarity and maturity in both English and Ukrainian. Stand Your Ground champions Ukraine as a stoic nation that would not give in no matter what. It has a catchy drumbeat sound. I wrote the lyrics before the war began, then refined them to reflect what was happening at that time. The songs stand alone as a compliment to a nation that was up and against one of the world's militarily huge and aggressive nations. Anna Mozolovich sings with passionate resistance in both English and Ukrainian.
With all the pain we will remain, we'll defend to see it through to the end.
Oil and Gas is a rock song with irony. This song questions the sense and morality of Europe buying energy from Russia, knowing that payments fuel the war. Could the European Union have done something differently? Could they be less dependent on Russia? After all, the wars in Chechnya, Georgia, Syria, Crimea and the continuing war in the Donbass should have raised everyone's eyebrows before the Ukrainian invasion. Did self-interest stand in the way? And what about the poisoning of Alexander Litvinenko, Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia Skripal, Alexei Navalny, Viktor Yushchenko, and the many political murders along the way? Were politicians blindsided by cheap energy? And here's a further paradox. The pretext for the 2003 Iraq War was to rid the country of weapons of mass destruction, WMDs. Though, when none were found, this changed to regime change, and then bringing democracy to the Middle East. The Iraq War allegedly had nothing to do with oil and gas, though there are vast quantities of the stuff under its sands. Fast forward to February the 24th, 2022. Russia invades Ukraine to rid the country of Nazis. However, Russia is aware that Europe is gradually reducing its reliance on Russian oil and gas and knows westward-looking Ukraine has lots of the stuff too, and could usurp Russia's domination. Here, Rock Lars rocks your socks off in English and Ukrainian while telling some home truths. Mariupol salutes the steelworks' fantastic defence and bravery through one soldier's eyes. These soldiers were so determined that this song warrants a punk rock, anti-establishment and anti-Russian sound. Denis Lyubimov belts out this song in both English and Ukrainian. In Ukraine is about the country's industries, architecture, agriculture, metro and traditions. It's a pleasant diversion from the war itself. It's a song about before the war and what it will hopefully be after the war. A lovely ballad of sunnier times when Ukrainian people just lived in peace. It's sung with a heartfelt feeling by Tally Cord in both English and Ukrainian. NATO is an angry pop song, something to hum, enjoy and think about. The key message is in the chorus's hook. It sets out my belief that if NATO had understood Russia's paranoia, it could have stopped its advance on the old Eastern Bloc and allowed a cushion of buffer states between Russia and the NATO bloc. You'll find examples of buffers between two states to prevent war if you visit the DMZ, that's a demilitarised zone, in South Korea, or closer to home, in Israel and Northern Ireland. NATO say they do not send troops to non-NATO countries, though they have previously deployed peacekeeping troops in Afghanistan and Kosovo. NATO has also encountered a possible escalation of war with the Russians. In 2010, British singer and ex-soldier James Blunt told the BBC how he refused an order to attack Russian troops when he was in Kosovo. Blunt said he was willing to risk being court-martialed by rejecting the order from a US General, Wesley Clark. He was backed by British General Sir Mike Jackson, who said, "I'm not going to have my soldiers be responsible for starting World War III." So, despite NATO saying they don't intervene in non-NATO countries, they do. Thus, in theory, they could go into Ukraine as peacemakers, but it risks World War III. Alex Breezer sings with disguised anger in both English and Ukrainian. Brothers is a ballad of two brothers falling out. It's an analogy for two states falling out. It reflects on good times past, at war now, and facing an uncertain future. One day both countries will have to get along. In Hamburg, a sustained campaign of strategic bombing during World War II during the last week of July 1943, codenamed Operation Gomorrah, created an immense firestorm. It destroyed most of the city and killed an estimated 37,000 civilians and wounded 180,000 more. Yet, 15 years later, when the Beatles played in Hamburg, everything had changed. Andriy Chebanov sings beautifully in both English and Ukrainian. Matt Monro could have sung this song.
What happened is was, then I look at you and I know.
You're Gonna Pay is a rap song questioning who is to pay to rebuild the country. With lots of Russian money locked away in the Western bank vaults, is that where payments begin? The Guardian recently reported that a consortium of Ukrainian and international lawyers is preparing to launch a mass civil legal action against the Russian state, including private military contractors and business people backing the Russian war effort. This is an attempt to gain financial compensation for millions of Ukrainian victims of the war. I wish them luck. This song is astutely rapped in English and Ukrainian by Denis Lyubimov.
Down the Dnipro, sinking into a deep black hole. No, it's hard for me to explain. My Ukrainian heart will remain.
My Ukrainian heart will remain. This song is a powerful ballad that builds until a choral chorus emerges and grows the sense of emotion that inspires tears and admiration in equal measure. It's written with sadness and defiance in mind. Leandro Bastos sings his heart out with the English version, and Timofey Lisov stirringly sings the Ukrainian version. Leandro's vocals bring shivers down my spine. This is one of my favourite songs. Live in Peace was written the summer before the war broke out. It reminds me of a lakeside walk with my wife, daughter-in-law and granddaughter. As we walked by the lake, I noticed how all the water birds shared the water and how they coexisted and managed to live in peace and harmony. This folksy song is earthily sung in English by Canadian Justin Beecham and superbly in Ukrainian by Bally.
Upon the lake, it started me thinking, if ducks can live with swans.
If only you knew.
In Your Mind, the penultimate song, is a more mysterious and sinister version of Lack of Love. The video reflects the darkness of Putin's KGB role and the art of spying. It's brilliantly sung in English by Caitlin May and beautifully and harmoniously by Anastasia in Ukrainian.
But I hope you will change your mind and maybe one day you'll find a way to.
I Apologise is the final song. The song reflects a mythical idea that in 2025, when Putin is 73, he looks back and expresses sorrow at what he's done. It was originally called Tears and written a year before the war, but when I listened again, I heard Putin's apology for the war. I know that is a dream. Maybe he thinks that I wish I'd never started this. We can only hope. But why 2025? In 1969, Zager and Evans sang In the Year 2525 If Man is Still Alive, so I thought that was an appropriate year. Although I Apologise should be sung by a male, I think it's more poignantly sung by a female. Maybe the female is a deathbed angel, and you can hear a fire burning in the background. It's sung hauntingly by Anastasia in both English and Ukrainian.
I hope that is true. This is all I can say.
There's also a song missing from this album that I refused to write. It's about Donald Trump. According to the Wall Street Journal on November 16, 2019, since taking office, President Trump has criticised Ukraine for corruption and expressed sympathy with Russia's historical claim to parts of the country, views that have affected his views of Ukraine. President Trump also withheld military aid to Ukraine out of concern over Ukraine's corruption. Then he also tried to discredit Ukraine by implying it was Ukraine, not Russia, who interfered with the 2016 presidential election. But evidence on election interference points conclusively to Russia, not Ukraine. Can you imagine what will happen to Ukraine if he gets into presidential office again in 2024? There would be no Ukraine. Trump gave Putin the impression that he was sympathetic to the aims of the war. That's why there is no song in this album about Trump. Julia's story. So now I want to talk to you about Julia's story. This narrative is from Julia herself. I live in Pavlograd in the Dnipropetrovsk region of Ukraine. My day started with a 6:15 a.m. call from my husband. It changed my life. Julia, get up, the war started. I hear explosions. I picked up my son and all the things that came to hand, including the cat, and went to a village near to my town where my husband's mother and nephews live. At the same time, my husband joined the territorial defence. The village, Verbovatovka, about 20 kilometres away, was quieter because there were no deafening sirens. However, there was an air of general panic, and sometimes distant explosions were heard. And as there were no bomb shelters, we hid in basements. Every day started by calling family and friends and asking, "How are you?" In Ukraine, the question, "How are you?" equates with "I love you," because everyone starts the day by calling everyone they love. As the situation deteriorated, we realised that the war would not end quickly and became more scared. My biggest fear was for my son, my little emu, who's just 4 years old. So then I went to my parents who live in Lozovaya in the Kharkiv region, a further 40 to 50 kilometres away. But there we ran into new difficulties as one day when we came home from the store, a loud siren sounded, followed by a series of very clear explosions. So we just ran. I then realised I couldn't keep my son safe, and I didn't want him to see all the hardships of war. So I left the cat with my parents, packed a backpack, and drove 4 hours to catch an evacuation train from Lozova to Lviv. There was a lot of fighting and rocket fire en route to Kharkiv, and everyone was very tense. All the cars were full of women and children coming from the Lugansk region, where they'd been living through a war for 8 years. I was lucky to go halfway with my friends. However, the train journey through Kiev was what I was most afraid of because it was an evacuation train, and Kiev was shelled regularly. Approaching Kharkiv train station platform seemed quite normal, even though I could see columns of black smoke in the distance. When the train was on the platform, my son, Mark, sat next to me, and in front of me were 3 women and 6 children from the Lugansk region. Though when on the train I heard 3 bangs. I don't understand what happened. The bangs were right in front of me. I turned my head, and in seconds the whole carriage fell to the floor, and my son was dragged off his seat. He was covered with a blanket, and I immediately fell down to him. As the train moved and left, we were on the floor for at least another hour. We then journeyed another 19 hours, but didn't sleep through worry. Luckily, we reached Lviv calmly. From Lviv, we took a train to Poland. The train was packed, and after leaving the train in Lviv, we queued for a train to Poland for a further 3 hours. We eventually arrived in Przemysl, where we went through Polish customs and onto another train to Katowice. This took 3 more hours. It was a tiring journey, and by night time the next day, Mark was asleep in my arms. The train had no seat, so we shared the luggage car with others. It was our second night on the road, and as I hadn't slept for a day, I just sobbed with fatigue. Mark managed 3 hours sleep. We stayed 3 to 4 hours in Katowice, and the volunteers put us on the next train to Gdansk. And thanks to the Polish volunteers, we had some rest and regained some senses. After 7 more hours, I met my brother. Meanwhile, Mark passed out on the train and woke up at my brother's home, all the time asking, do we need to go further? He was already afraid of trains. The overall trip was just awful, and it took me a long time to recover from it. With the fatigue and insanity, you think, what is this all for? But then you remember that you're not just going to visit, you just run away from war, and you just want to live in a world where you're not afraid to go out. You want to live where you're not afraid. And this helped me get through. I met only good people on my journey, helpful, understanding and caring people. And I am incredibly grateful for that. My relatives remain in Ukraine, and I worry about them. I'm very worried about Ukraine and my husband, who has been hospitalised twice, and all the guys who had to fight to protect us all. Everyone hopes and waits for the war to be over so they can go home. Summing up. This story started through concern for Julia. I then researched Eastern European history, trying to figure out what this war was about. I discovered what Ukraine was and is. Historically overrun by Poland, Russia, Austro-Hungarian Empire and the rest. Though the only way I could understand it was from the perspective of 1991, when the world nations accepted the borders defined after the fall of the Soviet Union. Then everyone was all full of hope. On reflection, is the war about Russia's fear that Ukraine is overrun by Nazis? Is it about oil and gas, national pride, or simply megalomania by someone with a big chip on his shoulder? Is it about the encroachment of NATO, or a few or all of these issues? Ask these questions to Ukrainian mothers watching Russian missiles heading straight at them and their families. Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, NPT. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Ukraine held about 1/3 of the Soviet nuclear arsenal, the third largest in the world at the time. On the 5th of December 1994, the Budapest Memorandum on Security Assurances, signed by the Russian Federation, the United Kingdom and the United States, committed them from threatening or using military force or economic coercion against Ukraine, except in self-defence or otherwise in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. It also committed them to support the country in the event of attack. As a result of other agreements and memorandums signed between 1993 and 1996, Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons. I just thought you'd like to know.